Hey, how's it going, everybody? So, the month of May marks Incrementum Financial Veteran Investing, or IFVI's, one full year of investing. So, we've been at it since May of 2017. And so, in honor of one full year of investing, and for everything that we stand for, I wanted to create a couple videos about budgeting, the basics and fundamentals thereof, to help either members or family and friends of members out with whatever budgeting that they currently do have, or if they don't budget at all. I'm hoping these videos might be able to help explain it and get people more comfortable with the concept and the idea of it. So I wanted to make 4 videos today. One is talking about the basics and fundamentals, this video, right? The second one is discussing how to properly plan your debt reduction, coupled with investment benefits for retirement. The third video is going to talk about budgeting examples for minimum and optimal debt reduction that we discussed in the video prior. We'll be using Excel screen sharing so that way you guys can see the Excel spreadsheet that I put together. And those Excel spreadsheets I can email to anybody. They have the formulas in them, and you can kind of just plug and play with them if you want. And then the last video is going to talk specifically about military, single, and married budgeting. So, based off of a certain LES or a certain lifestyle. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. When you're doing budgeting, the most important thing is being 100% honest with yourself throughout the entire process. Not only with your expenses and your income, but how you are and how you operate your spending habits and stuff like that. So be 100% honest with yourself, and if you have a good budget, then whatever goals you have, you'll be able to achieve. All right, so what is budgeting, right? Basically, it's ensuring you spend less than what you're actually earning. And by doing that, you can plan for both the short and long-term goals that you have. So some of the purposes of budgeting that people have, obviously, is projecting out short and long term, being able to avert a financial crisis, getting the most bang for your buck in whatever job you currently have, planning for a major life change that's coming up, or just generally wanting to live a certain lifestyle, and you're just trying to budget to figure out how you can do that, right? If you want to go on 4 big vacations a year, whatever that might look like. Okay, so my suggestion for doing budgeting is using just simple Excel spreadsheet. There's a lot of apps out there that people use to track spending habits or what you're spending your money on and stuff like that, but I'm a raw numbers kind of guy. I like to see, hey, this category is this much, or hey, I think I need a second category for this, or these two things really aren't the same, I'm going to separate them or whatnot. It gives you basically unlimited freedom, and you can set up formulas, and it kind of does a lot of the math for you once you spend a little bit of time on it. It takes a little bit to get used to, and at first it can be overwhelming, but after the end of these 4 videos, hopefully you feel pretty comfortable with it. Alright, so kind of the meat of this video is coming up here. We're going to talk about some techniques for tracking expenses and kind of just some good rules of thumb for budgeting. So let's just dive right in. The first one is tracking your expenses, even the small ones, right? Basically, budgeting 101 here is every time you spend money, you need to document it. So whether you're keeping track all day and you come home and you go open up your budget Excel and you type in exactly what you spent on, or if you keep a written log, so you have a little notebook with you, so that way if you're out and about and you buy something and you want to buy a soda, whatever, you can just write it down in your little notepad, that way you won't forget. So always document it, especially the small stuff, because that's where people start to forget. A mitigation of that is that you can actually just take out a certain amount of cash. So let's say you're going to have $100 every 2 weeks for just whatever you want, right? Just the small stuff, the impulse buying. And whenever that $100 is out, then it's out. And that can sometimes be a little bit easier way of budgeting. Alright, the next is using very accurate descriptions on what you're spending your money on, especially if you're a sporadic spender. So if you're more like me and you only buy a few things a month, then it's pretty easy to keep track about what you're spending your money on. I don't go places and just buy something randomly. Even if I want it, I kind of force myself not to get it. But if you're one of those people, and it's totally fine if you are, where you're just like, you see that, you want that, you get that, just make sure that you're tracking and you're writing it down, right? Next one is budgeting by the month, not the paycheck. So The longer your budgeting period, so a 1 month period, is probably the longest I would go. I wouldn't do quarterly. So if you do a 1 month budgeting period, it's pretty easy to do a 1 year budget because it's just 12 of the same thing basically, as opposed to a bi-weekly where now you have 24 budgets to deal with and you're just doubling the amount of work. So next is to, next is most of your budget's going to be fixed income and expenses, right? So it's going to be pretty much the same exact thing every month. Month after month, same exact thing, easy to predict. It's the variable expenses that are really going to fluctuate and where you can maybe start saving some of that money. Variable expenses are things like gas, groceries, utilities, and some of these are more based on the self-control than those fixed expenses. All right. Next thing is occasional expenses. So these happen a couple times a year. Maybe your car insurance comes out once every 6 months, or your property taxes are quarterly, whatever that may look like. You can budget these in monthly, and that's the best way to do it. So that way, you're feeling really good for 2 months, then all of a sudden, that third month hits, and you have to pay your 6 months of insurance. And you're like, wow, I thought I was ahead, now I'm behind. So to get away with that, or to get around that, is to just have them in every single month, and you're just paying a little bit into a savings account. You can even use a separate one than your nest egg savings account, and that really helps people not get surprised. All right, next is to have your nice to have expenses at the very bottom of your budget. So if you're starting to go over your budget or you're cutting it pretty close, you go down to the bottom of your list, and that's first on the chopping block. All right. The less self-control you have, the more specific you want your categories to be. We kind of already said that. Your long-term financial goals should be labeled as monthly expenses. Things like planning for your retirement, or if you have a mid or short-term goal. You don't want to wait for excessive cash to start planning ahead more long-term. You want to budget it in a little bit at a time early on. All right. Next is to be flexible. So let's say you have a party coming up next month. So what you want to do is you want to spend a little bit less this month, so that way next month you can splurge. Or if let's say you don't have a whole month, that's fine. You spend a little bit more. Then next month like, hey, I need to spend just a little bit less because I went a little bit over budget last month. So just be flexible with it. Don't get too upset if you bust budget one time. It's not going to be the end of the world. Make sure that you always reward yourself. So if you're on a very, very tight budget, do one small thing for yourself. That tub of ice cream that you wanted, that can last you 2 weeks, or going to go see that one new movie that you've been waiting, a few months to go see, whatever it is, right? Make sure you reward yourself a couple times a month. If your finances are a little bit more free and you're putting quite a bit into a retirement or an investment, go ahead and reduce that a little bit every once in a while and splurge on a concert or a vacation or something. All right, next is inflation versus fluctuation. So this is talking about income. So if you have an inflation style income, that means that the only thing you're really worried about is getting a raise or getting an advancement or a promotion at work, i.e. getting more money, or of course getting fired. Because you're basically on a salary and your paycheck's not going to fluctuate much. Fluctuation is where you're getting that hourly or commission paycheck. This is a lot more complicated to budget, especially if you're one of those sporadic spenders. And that's because you have to basically take 3 months, 3 prior months, and then just average those, get the mean of those months, and calculate that as your monthly income. And then you always have to plan in for your low months, because you might have 3 low months in a row based on seasonal or whatever it is that your job is going to dictate. So you have to be very careful with the fluctuation income. All right. Next is to, it kind of goes into what we were talking about just now, is making sure you have your nest egg suitable for whatever your lifestyle is, your emergencies, or whatever low months you might have. 3 to 6 months is good for fluctuating income. So that way, if you go a few months without, then you'll have ample amount of funds, or if there's an emergency and you have to, dish out a lot of money, and then you have a couple low months, then you're still good. If you have a fixed income, 2 to 3 months is pretty safe. All right. Next thing is to know what your current trends for retirement are. So sometimes people will spend a little bit of time, they'll come up with a retirement plan, an investment plan, and then they're like, I'm just going to put money away, do a recurring thing, and then never look at it again and call it quits. Because that's what people say to do, right? Invest and then don't look at it again. Well, that's kind of good. However, for budgeting specifically, whenever there's a change in your lifestyle, you're going to need to adjust what your retirement is going to look like, right? It's always important to know what 40 years from now is going to look like. So if you get a promotion, or you lose your job, or you take a job that's paying less, whatever change in your life, up or down, you need to adjust your your projections for retirement, because that's a big deal. Because once you hit that age, you don't want to worry about, hey, where's my money coming from? All right, and the last one is big fun expenditures should be planned ahead as much as possible. So if you want to go on 2 big vacations next year, even if you're not sure where they are, sit down and kind of think like, hey, maybe I might want to go to Europe or whatever, right? And it's going to approximately cost me $2,000 to go. 12 months out, put that in. And so whatever you think it's going to cost you, divide it by 12 and throw it in as a monthly expense, and then put that money in your savings account, but you're paying it and it's coming up just like a normal bill. So when the time comes to have that vacay, you're not draining your nest egg to actually take that vacation. You have the money saved up. And that's just an easy way to plan ahead. All right, some tips for paying off your debt. Rule of thumb is normally to pay off the highest percentage debt first, and that way you're just saving money in the long run. If you're contemplating paying off your debt versus an investment, you can use this as a rule of thumb too. About 8% is a good average of how much you're going to make in a stock market in 1 year. But if you have a credit card with 20% interest, obviously it'd be smarter to pay that off first before you get heavy into investing. I'm not saying don't start investing a little bit, but put the majority of your finances into that debt. All right. Sometimes if you have a smaller debt with a less percentage of interest, it's okay to pay that off other than a larger sum with larger interest rate. And that can just be for peace of mind. So if you have something that's $500 at 3% versus something that's $5,000 at 10%, sometimes you just want to knock that $500 thing out and then focus all your funds on that one debt, and that's totally okay to do. It gives you a sense of accomplishment too, so it's nice. Avoid unneeded debt as much as possible, especially once it starts to compile. Let's say you take, you finance your TV, your TV, your bed, and a couch, a huge couch, right? $1,400 L-shaped couch. 2 years, no interest, no big deal, right? Minimum payments. However, all of those finances are scheduled for 4 years minimum payments, and that's all you're paying is the minimum. Well, come those 2 years, you're going to start paying interest on whatever you have left, and that's really going to hit you hard. So all at once, you're going to get all this interest and all these extra minimums. Your minimum's going to go up. You might be paying off a car, whatever it looks like, right? It's going to hit you really hard. So to mitigate that, if you want something, put it as an expense, start putting money into your savings account as much as your budget permits, and then once you have enough saved, go and buy it, and then you don't have to worry about interest, right? And it won't come up, and you'll save a lot of money that way. Last tip for debt is to set up automatic bill pay. This is just, you have less transactions to deal with. You're not worried about, oh man, did I pay that bill? Did I forget to, or whatnot? It just really reduces the chance of late fees. So you're going to save money, and you can still pay your own bills early on. I do that. I pay my credit card a couple times a month, just so I have an accurate picture about how much money is in my checking. But yeah, so that's a nice little tip. All right, and lastly, we're going to talk about common mistakes when it comes to budgeting. Mistake number 1 is not tracking your expenses. This comes with the whole self-control thing. If you have pretty strong self-control and you have a looser budget, then not tracking every single expense can be okay. But if you're on a tighter budget and you do a lot of sporadic spending, then you're going to want to track every single expense, especially for the first few months where you're really trying to figure out exactly where your money's going. All right, mistake number 2 is people buying on impulse. It's those small little purchases that people might not be documenting, or they're not really thinking it's going to add up. They buy, one thing in the checkout line a couple times a week, but that adds up to $15-20 a week, and then come the end of the month there's 75-80 bucks, and they busted budget by $50, and they don't know where or how that happened, right? It could be from impulse buying. Mistake number 3 is becoming a victim of budget busting. So going into the same thing is where you budget so strictly that you give yourself no wiggle room whatsoever, and then you're constantly busting your budget, and you just give up because you're like, this is so frustrating. I'm not saving money, like this isn't helping at all, whatever. So that's where you have to be very realistic, and you have to give yourself enough wiggle room. I always tell people, hey, undervalue your income, overvalue your expenses, so that way at the end of the month when you have an extra $200, you can go ahead and throw that at whatever highest debt you have, or throw it in your savings account, whatever, right? It's always good to have more money than what you expected. All right, mistake number 4 is being so frugal that you're just absolutely miserable. Once again, reward yourself for doing a good job on your budget. Just don't make your whole life miserable in order to save a few bucks. All right. Mistake number 5 is trying to do everything as inexpensively as possible. So if you have a home improvement project and you want to save some money, so you're going to do it yourself, but you have no idea how, and then you mess something up, it could cost you more money. Or if you're going to buy a product and you have 2 options, option A is a lot cheaper than option B, but option B would last you 3 to 5 years, and you're going to end up buying like 5 to 10 of option A's, to where 3 years down the road it's going to cost you 50% more than what option B would have. So always be thinking long term when you're going to purchase something that's going to be used as a tool or whatever you're going to be utilizing that for, because a $20 tool versus a $5 one, and you're going to end up buying 6 of these. You might not, okay, $20, no big deal over a 3-year time span, but if you're doing that for every single thing you're buying, where you're always having to rebuy stuff nonstop instead of having quality products that will last you, you're talking about a few hundred items at 20%. Like, it really starts to add up long term. So just keep that in mind. Mistake number 6, and the very last thing we're going to talk about, is not asking for help. So not everyone is super inclined to work on their budgeting and their finances on their own. Some people will just like to completely ignore it altogether. Some people don't get it. It's whatever the case may be, it's really no big deal. If you're looking to start budgeting now, that's what's important, right? So if you're not sure about something, ask for help. Ask a friend, ask a spouse, ask one of your parents, or ask a coworker, whoever. Anyone that you think knows or understands. My suggestion would be to ask a couple different people, right? Hey, what do you do to budget? Do you use an app? What's your technique? How do you do this? Hey, you're always going on vacations. Like, is it because you're budgeting well? Like, what's going on, right? Pick people's brains, figure out what works for them, develop your own techniques, and then you're just going to enjoy it more. And then, of course, you can always get a financial advisor. In the military, it's free. If you're in the civilian world, your company might be able to provide you one. I'm not sure. So yeah, this was just very basic techniques and tips, and just kind of some fundamentals when it comes to budgeting. The next 3 videos, we're going to do some screen sharing, and I'm going to show you guys examples of everything that we just talked about. So I hope this helped. I hope it made sense. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to comment and ask me. I'll answer you guys as soon as I possibly can. All right, appreciate you guys listening.